now. Wonderful. Just going to do this. Okay. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Crip pedagogies. I'm just going to quickly reiterate the event description just so that we can all kind of ground ourselves and understand why we're here. So the concept of cripping a course, which is adapting and transforming traditional educational practices to be more inclusive. This encourages educators to think creatively about their teaching. This concept originates from disability studies and is rooted in the idea of challenging and transforming conventional norms in education that often marginalize students with disabilities. So today we're going to explore how learning environments can exist as opportunities to practice care, co-created collective access, and community. We will learn how to bring principles of disability justice into your teaching practice for the benefit of all bodies. We'll also explore where to find opportunities to crip your course and how to incorporate accessible practices without compromising personal wellness. So I also want to add that I wanted to use this opportunity today to highlight resources at Queen's for you to do this work. So you'll see that in a second. So I've compiled a resource list and Carolyn will pop that into the chat. And you can feel free to check out those resources as I'm talking or afterwards. I just wanted to compile something to send out. We are also going to be putting out a Padlet. This screen has a QR code that you can access it through your phone if you like, but there's also a link that Carolyn will drop in the chat as well if you want to just do it on your computer. Feel free to use it throughout the session. In addition, if time permits, we'll have breakout rooms at the end for folks to just kind of meet each other and discuss their takeaways. Okay, so first things first. I was hoping folks could introduce themselves in the chat. Feel free to here and what faculty you're in and all that fun stuff. Here's a cute meme to sort of start things off. Based on this CAT scale, how do you feel today? Just drop the number. I'll just quickly describe this image here. There are 9 images of cats with varying degrees of emotion on his face. Cat number 1 is just eating a plant. Cat number 2 has sort of a mischievous grin. Cat number 3 is a sad cat. 4 is a cat with a decidedly annoyed expression. Picture 5 is a cat who is definitely in zoomies mode. He's all excited and silly. Number 6 is sticking his tongue out. Cat 7 is sleeping with his tongue out. Number 8 is a happy cat with a big smile. And number 9 kind of looks like he's mid-yawn, but also kind of looks like an angry expression. Personally, I think I'm maybe a 5 today. I barely slept last night and I'm kind of running on fumes, but we're going to have a good time today. Okay, so seeing lots of fun stuff in the chat. Yes. Don't worry, anyone who can't turn on your video, that's totally fine. No worries on my end. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to quickly go through my agenda for today. First, we're going to do an access check. We're going to have a land acknowledgement. I'll introduce myself a bit, kind of my background and what I do at Queen's. We'll talk about the foundational basics of Disability 101. We're going to talk about going beyond UDL or Universal Design for Learning. We'll explore what is cripping, the act of cripping. We'll talk about disability justice and pedagogical practices. We'll talk about self-care. And finally, we will talk briefly about the AODA post-secondary education recommendations. Okay, so access check. So the slide deck that we'll be exploring today is available online. I sent that to Carolyn to share with you folks in the chat. There's also a resource list available. If you wanted to enable caption, I think they're already enabled, but just in case by some fluke they're not enabled on your computer, you can hit the show captions button, select the caption language and save, and you're all set. As we are coming together today in a virtual meeting space, please use your time and space however you like. Cameras can be on or off, like I said. Conversation can take place via the chat or the mic if you prefer. Please move around, eat, drink, and stim as you need to. I do recognize that a webinar might not be the most accessible or best learning modality for everyone. I do encourage you to use the slide deck and the resource handout as needed, and feel free to follow up with me after the session if you like. This webinar will also be recorded, so you can watch it later at your own pleasure. So again, like I said, if time permits, we'll have breakout rooms at the end to kind of just informally meet each other or talk about their takeaways. Again, cameras can be on or off. In the breakout rooms, there's no pressure, and you should all feel free to communicate via the chat or the mic. All right, so today, I'm speaking today from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I am a cisgender, white, disabled, and queer settler. To acknowledge this traditional territory is to recognize the significant history that predates the arrival of the European colonists. Not only should we acknowledge the land, but also the Indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live upon it, and whose practices and spiritualities are tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the territory and its other inhabitants today, along with the ongoing legacy of colonialism. We must persist in questioning the division that we as settlers create between Indigenous peoples and the land. The settler perspective is grounded in Cartesian dualism, the belief that humans are distinct from nature and the land, which fundamentally contradicts many Indigenous worldviews. Now, as I complete most of my work online, I continually reflect on the need for indigenization and decolonization in online spaces as well, particularly in light of the persistent digital divide and the implications that that has for access to higher education. I also continue to grapple with the reality of the violent resource extraction practices that support the development and maintenance of digital technologies and their supporting infrastructures, which disproportionately impacts Indigenous populations across the globe. I take counsel in my lifelong journey of learning and unlearning as a settler on these lands, from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action, the final report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous people. I'm also grateful that at Queen's, the Office for Indigenous Initiatives, the Center for Teaching and Learning, and the Human Rights and Equity Office all offer excellent resources for incorporating decolonization and indigenization steps and actions into your teaching practice. I highly recommend checking out their pages on the Queen's website for more information. Roughly 2 years ago, the Human Rights and Equity Office adopted the acronym I-EDIAA to identify and carry out equity initiatives at Queen's. The first I stands for indigenization, which according to the HREO is, quote, separated from EDIAA with a hyphen to foreground responsibilities to honor obligation to Indigenous communities, which are separate and distinct from equity and inclusion efforts. Further, the distinct placement of indigenization in this formulation encourages more careful reflection and accountability around exactly how the unit/equity initiative is in fact addressing indigenization before a decision to adopt the full acronym is made. End quote. This commitment to indigenization can and should be honored and implemented by everyone who works and attends Queen's, and the ongoing work of dismantling white supremacy and other oppressive power structures in our settler colonial systems. Okay, so that's me on the screen. My name is Kate. brothers. I use she, her pronouns. I have brown hair, green eyes, and wear tortoiseshell patterned glasses. Today, I'm wearing a purple t-shirt with a gold necklace. And my background is blurred, but it's a pile of books on top of an already crammed full bookshelf. My position at Queen's is the Accessibility and Teaching and Learning Coordinator for the Faculty of Arts and Science, which means I'm a go-to resource for accessibility issues. I advise faculty and staff on understanding accessibility guidelines. I give guidance on integrating accessibility into curriculum planning and course design. I'm also available to conduct audits of courses and course materials, to identify and enhance those courses that facilitate student skills in and experiences related to equity, diversity, and inclusion and accessibility. And finally, like the reason we are here today, I am also available to deliver workshops, information sessions, and educational training focused on accessibility. Okay, so Disability 101. I'm going to briefly touch on the foundation of how we talk and think about disability and how we got to where we are today. It's important to recognize that ableism can be both overt and subtle, manifesting in policies, practices, and attitudes that disadvantage students with disabilities. Classrooms, both the physical space and the temporary community that makes up a course, can be used as sites of praxis and care. Now, what this looks like in teaching and learning are opportunities to co-facilitate accessibility, care, and re-examine traditional structures that reproduce ableism. So we're going to talk about a few ways of thinking about disabled bodies, as I'm sure some of you may already be familiar with. Dr. Rhoda Olkin outlined 3 overarching models of disability: the moral model, the medical model, and the social model. So what is likely the oldest narrative surrounding disabled bodies? The moral model designates disability as a reflection on a person's or family's character, actions, and karma, carrying potential stigma, shame, or blame, especially if associated with wrongdoing. This model is fairly still globally prevalent. It's often how disability is depicted in media, where physical disabilities can be linked to evil, or alternatively, portrayed as inspiring figures who achieve extraordinary feats, or as the disability rights activist Stella Young coined it, inspiration porn. The medical model of disability tends to consider disabled bodies as deficient and in need of curing or accommodation. It emphasizes the ways in which disabled bodies do not align with the norm. Disability in the medical model is seen as a pathological impairment in body system or function, and the goal is to restore it to a normal state. This model positions trained professionals as the experts, and disabled individuals are expected to follow their guidance. The social model emphasizes the way in which people collectively identify barriers in the world that must be removed in order for all bodies to participate. In the social model, disability is viewed as an aspect of identity akin to race or gender. Bodies are neutral and naturally varied. Disability arises from a mismatch between the individual and their environment, which creates barriers, not the disability itself. Addressing disability in the social model involves changing the environment and society rather than fixing the individuals. So negative stereotypes, discrimination, and various systems of oppression hinder environmental, and sorry, my notes just went away. They're back. Change and inclusion. So the social model first emerged in the 60s, commonly the framework of mainstream disability activists today. It's a great place to start when you start thinking about how ableism functions in our society. So if we start to talk about what cripping is, if the term cripping is unfamiliar, we can look to the work of disability studies scholar Carrie Sandel. Her work examines how the term crip and queer function. According to Sandel, they function threefold. They're reclaimed labels from their derogatory connotations. They convey the fluid identities of their communities, and they serve as verbs of contestation. To queer or to crip existing systems involves challenging expectations, defamiliarizing concepts, and creating new possibilities, while rejecting the binary positions and definitions that position queer and crip identities against norms of sexuality and ability. Sandel highlights that cripping describes radical work that reframes mainstream representations to expose able-bodied assumptions and the negative social impacts of homogenization. So in thinking about how cripping, first I do want to say, whenever you see this icon of the hand cupping the idea cloud, it signifies an opportunity to reconsider an accepted practice that might be harmful in teaching. So when we think about how cripping applies to higher ed, can we consider how accepted practices in teaching often reproduce oppression in an unfair power dynamic? So an example here would be attendance or participation marks. Assigning grades based on behavior often forces students to conform to norms. It doesn't allow for divergence. Students can be shy. They can prefer to communicate via writing. They can be neurodivergent. They could have a chronic illness that's flaring up for half the semester. There's a whole host of reasons why grading behavior is not exactly assessing their knowledge. Another example is algorithmic surveillance in your course, which can be used to detect disability, abnormality, inconsistencies. But the problem is that it misses so much context, like the entire life that the student is living outside of schoolwork. The information that spits out in the reports can reinforce harmful narratives. Life is not lived consistently and predictably. Learning happens in fits and starts, and slumps and setbacks are common enough. Here's a useful place to consider Alison Kiefer's concept of crip time. And I'll just read the text on the screen. Crip time is flux time, not just expanded, but exploded. It requires reimagining our notions of what can and should happen in time, and recognizing how expectations of how long things take are based on very particular minds and bodies. Rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, crip time bends the clock to meet disabled minds and bodies. Okay, so the framework that encompasses all of the pedagogical strategies I'm going to outline today is called disability justice. The disability justice movement contends that ableism undergirds and enables other prejudices, and that systems of oppression are interconnected. The disability justice framework is used to re-examine various disability, human rights, and justice movements through an intersectional lens. Here on the screen today, or right now, are the 10 principles of disability justice, which were written by an organization called Citizens Invalid. So we're going to look at 4 of these principles in particular and see how these, how they can be embedded in teaching practices. So the first one that we'll look at is intersectionality. The quote on the screen is, "We do not live single issue lives, Audre Lorde." So I'm going to quote here from Citizens Invalid explanation of the term intersectionality. Simply put, this principle says that we are many things and that they all impact us. We are not only disabled, we are also each coming from a specific experience of race, class, sexuality, age, religious background, geographical location, immigration status, and more. Depending on context, we all have areas where we experience privilege as well as areas of oppression. So there's a question in the Padlet that is related to intersectionality. It's also the discussion question for the breakout rooms if we have time. How do you incorporate intersectionality into your course? Or can you think of examples that you've encountered? The image on the screen here just has different bubbles of various colors, all describing dimensions of intersectionality. I'll read out a few of them. So language, political affiliation, occupation, location, marital status, sexual orientation, nationality, age, gender identity, race, ethnicity, religion. So examples of incorporating intersectionality into your courses would be things like ensuring representation in your course materials of various identities so that students see representation of themselves and their lived experiences. Introducing BIPOC subject matter experts into your curriculum. Being considerate of the space that you're taking up as an authority figure in the classroom. So a classroom, right, is a shared space. Think about how you take up space. Think about your positionalities. What are your intersectional identities? And how do they inform your pedagogy? And how do they inform the canon from which you teach? So in an essay for Learning for Justice, a Duke University student by the name of Miriam S. Nuga wrote, as educators, you can either empower or oppress students by the way you choose to teach and see them. Your intentional decisions to incorporate some communities and identities into the classroom while leaving others out show which side you choose. Okay, so the second principle we'll talk about is leadership of those most impacted. The quote on the disability, if you remember, is a quote by Aurora Levins Morales, and it says, "We are led by those who most know these systems." So an example of reconsidering your teaching practice in order to embed this disability justice principle lies in the accommodations process. So on the screen here, we just have, it's a quote, it's an excerpt from the Senate Academic Accommodations for Students with Disabilities policy. It's listed in my resource list. I'll read it out just so that folks who maybe can't see the screen can hear. So this is just a couple of the responsibilities that educators have for accommodations. As requested and required, actively engage in the academic accommodation planning process with students with disabilities and QSAS by defining the essential academic requirements and standards to be considered when developing an academic accommodations plan, and considering a range of possible approaches and reasonable solutions to uphold essential academic requirements and standards. Work collaboratively with students with disabilities, QSAS staff, SGS, or faculty/school colleagues and administration, and other university employees to implement academic accommodations in a manner that meets essential academic requirements and standards and protects the dignity and privacy of students. Understand that their role is to help implement academic accommodations outlined by QSAS and not to obtain information from students about their specific disabilities. Students are not required to disclose private medical information to or seek accommodation directly from their professors, instructors, teaching assistants, etc. So when thinking about the disability justice principle, an example of reconsidering your practice is that at the beginning of the semester, you can reach out to students who have accommodations to let them know that you're just aware and that you're going to mindfully implement them. that small act of communication, like it takes 5 minutes to create an email template that you can just use for others, goes a long way. When students have to do all of the self-advocacy work of requesting accommodations, submitting documentation, and ensuring that they are taken seriously, not just by instructors, but by proctors, staff, and other students. Students will feel supported and empowered if they know their instructors understand that the process can be arduous and traumatizing. Okay. The third disability justice principle that we're going to talk about is recognizing wholeness. We've got a wheel of privilege and power on this slide that indicates the dimensionality of lived experience. Every person has history and experience and is worthy as they are, including you, the instructor. A classroom is a shared space. Again, so thinking about how you take up space and thinking about your intersectional identities and how they inform your pedagogy. Okay, another suggestion for implementing this disability justice principle of recognizing the wholeness of others would be to consider how your positionalities impact the way that you interact with students. This includes things like how you address students and the language that you use to refer to them. So this is a bit of a silly example, but I like the use of inclusive language here in this tweet. I'll read the text of it. Chat is honestly a perfect collective noun. A girl in class said, "Chat, I need a pen," and she got a pen. Easy, incredible. This is a good one, kids. So embedding these disability justice principles means, equal parts trust and acknowledgement. This instructor is a great example of taking cues from her students, understanding what works for them, and trusting students and promoting equity in her classroom. The last disability justice principle that we'll explore is collective access. So doing access checks, again, going back to the idea of a classroom as a shared space, regardless of whether it's an in-person course or online, you can make access checks a regular part of your teaching practice in both in-person and online. They destigmatize the need for accommodations, and it creates a sense of safety and care for all students. It also recognizes that students have a vast variety of lived experiences. So this is taken from the University of Toronto's page on access checks. These are particularly for in-person, and I'll talk about online access checks after this. So I'll read the text on the screen. You can ask students questions about the space and identify their needs to which you may be able to respond. Is there anything about the space, for example, light, sound, temperature, layout, that we should address now? Are there any other access needs that might affect your participation in the workshop or course that we could also address now? If you can, identify potential barriers to participation. For example, there is an echo in this room, which may distort my voice. Please let me know if you have trouble hearing me. Remember, the main objective is to normalize the conversation about accessibility. All right, virtual access checks. So I have a list here, a couple of examples of providing access checks when having like a Zoom meeting or, office hours online or workshops online or tutorials online. These are all taken from it's a document that I sort of co-created with other educational developers at Queen's. It's called the Accessibility for All During Virtual Meetings doc. It's linked in the resource list. So some examples include setting intention / the agenda for the meeting at the beginning, providing materials beforehand if possible, or send them afterwards, because not everyone, absorbs information at the same rate, or can take everything in the moment if they have the chance to peruse the materials afterwards. It would help a lot of folks. When you're speaking, especially if it's like on a panel or you're like having a class discussion, refer to who is speaking when you're speaking. So if I put my hand up and I say Kate speaking, I think that it just helps folks identify who is speaking, and it's just an easy practice to implement that helps. Providing visual description in introductions. This is useful not just for low vision users, but others who might not be looking at the screen for whatever reason. Providing time estimates for each portion of the meeting is fairly helpful for neurodivergent participants. My wife has ADHD, and we often talk about the ADHD time tax. Some neurodivergent folks cannot like experience time in a predictable way or a useful way. So providing time estimates especially when you have like chunks of a meeting, it's just helpful for them to like be able to locate and ground themselves in the flow of the meeting. And then finally, like I'm trying to demonstrate today, describing and narrating all shared visual content. It not only, helps out blind or low vision users, but it can also just provide extra context if you forget to add context when making the slide deck, or just help to situate it within the course material. Oh, and like I said, just check out that doc if you want more tips. Okay. So here are a couple of examples, again, to integrate collective access as a disability justice principle into your pedagogy. The text on the screen says, flexibility and creativity give us the skills to create community. And that is a quote from Sins Invalid. So creating like checkpoints or intervention points throughout the course of your course, so at the time frame of your course, really helps with students to create a sense of like a buy-in. They can give you feedback as you go along, how they're feeling about the assignments, how they're feeling about their performance in the course. It just indicates also to the students that that it's a collective experience and that feedback is important. Co-created classroom notes. Not only is that a way, so when I say that, I mean like just creating a Google Doc together that everyone can collaborate on, or setting up like a Discord channel or server rather or a Teams group for a course, and just everyone has access to it. Everyone can add their notes and thoughts and reflections. So again, it's not only a way to facilitate connection between students, but it's really helpful for collective memory and allowing for different perspectives to engage with the course material in a different modality, rather than just like the standard classroom discussion format. It's also a really great way to incorporate Crip time practices into your course. Having an easily accessible living document that can be used whenever needed is a pedagogical practice that doesn't really rely on strict like time frames and like unspoken rules for interaction. Instead, it lets students create their own schedule to interact with course material via collaboration with their peers. And speaking of peer collaboration / interaction, so consider how peer interaction is facilitated in the course. Is it for marks only? Can students give each other marks? Suggestion would be to, when you're rating peer performances, like in group projects, allow for the flexibility for students to identify their peer strengths and contributions in like maybe unconventional ways. I don't know if I have to, nope, okay. The last thing I wanted to say about that was I just wanted to mention a resource that, well, a person who has written a lot about this kind of thing. Sarah Majoki Curry is a mad studies scholar who, when I last checked, was at the University of Waterloo. She has a practice that really embeds this collective access principle. She creates what she calls a community first syllabus. So what that means is the syllabi in her courses are team and community oriented, and they're not like typically based on individual assignments or actions. So this method rewards students for how they contribute to class dynamics, how they build each other up, rather than stoking competition. Most of the course assignments she's developed require team play or interactivity. And also in her teaching practice, she implements what she calls giving back part of the grading scheme to community. So the final 5% in her courses are awarded by students to other students who they felt made a big difference in fostering classroom community. So yeah, Sarah is wonderful, has given so much to the Canadian critical disability studies community. I've linked to her Google Scholar profile in the resource list, so you should check out her work for sure. So, it's really difficult work to embed these principles into your pedagogical practices when they have to be intentionally cultivated. It adds to the labor. It adds like not just work, but also care labor. So I wanted to go through a few tips for just integrating self-care into your professional practice. That is also another question on the Padlet. If you have any tips or things that you like to do that you would like to share with folks, please head over there and fill that out. So the first thing is to seek out communities of practice and care networks. They exist all over the internet on social media sites like LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Twitter. Connecting with others like is such a sort of underrated, I think, way of coping with the work that we do. It's a way to keep learning. It's a way to have support. It's a way to find out solutions to things that you haven't heard about before. I really recommend. And not just on the internet, there are communities of practice here at Queen's as well, that you can seek out as instructors. Setting boundaries. So an example that I have that I like is, I feel like we might have all seen that email sign-off message that goes something like, my work hours might not be your work hours. Please respond at your convenience. That's Crip time. That's Crip time in action. That's giving grace to different workflows and processes that work for you. Making use of Queen's resources. So there are so many. I know that there was a session like the other day as part of this conference on the union and how to understand how the collective agreement works. The union is a great resource. Check out your HR portal. Check out whether you're eligible for the Employee and Family Assistance Program as an employee. They offer counseling services. Go to your undergrad chair for support. They are there to support you. There's also so many resources and trainings provided by the Center for Teaching and Learning for you to take and integrate into your practices, and just for you to be able to consistently deliver a robust, care-oriented pedagogical practice. Just looking at the time. Oh, we're good. Okay, amazing. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the AODA. So this is not explicitly disability justice oriented. I just really wanted to quickly mention these recommendations, these post-secondary education standards. I wanted to read an excerpt from their letter to the minister. So these post-secondary education standards were published in 2022 under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, 2005, or AODA for short. These recommendations are meant to be implemented in 2025. So it is relevant. So the text on the screen is an excerpt from the letter to the minister from the chair of the committee. It is essential that the post-secondary education community move away from a deficit model of disability that views disability as a, quote, problem to be fixed. We need to acknowledge that environmental barriers are erected every day. While it will take time for all the barriers identified in this report to be addressed and embedded into the culture of our institutions, intentional inclusion is a collective responsibility. These recommendations, the existing accessibility standards, and all the good work that is already happening at all institutions can move us to a fully accessible education system. This report is a call to action. So given that these recommendations have an effect on your duties as an educator, and also I don't know if anyone read the review of the accommodations report. This is also listed in my resource list. It gave a really good overview of how many students at Queen's are accessing QSAS and have registered for QSAS. I think it's gone up something like 173% in the last couple of years. It's really important to start implementing these standards into our practices. I would beseech you to just check out the entire document. It's organized by thematic barriers, like barriers that are grouped by theme. Some of them include like attitudes, behaviors, perceptions. There's one on assessment, curriculum, and instruction. and one on digital learning and technology. I wanted to specifically mention just one recommendation that you can enact right now in your teaching practice. It's recommendation 73. Identify and communicate digital learning and technology intentions. So I'll read the text on the screen. Post-secondary institutions and educators shall identify in their course syllabi the digital technology and learning components as well as the course format needed to meet both A, the academic and engagement expectations, and B, the essential requirements of the program of study in each course. Where new technology is introduced after the start of class input shall be sought by the course instructor through a variety of options, including anonymous communication, and feedback related to accessibility will be addressed as a priority. So the importance of putting this into your syllabus allows all students, including disabled students, to test the technology, like the learning platforms, and see whether it will work for them. Some students use assistive technology. Not all tech works with assistive technology. If you want to learn more about assistive tech and how tools that you might choose to adopt, how they work with, like, say, screen readers, you can reach out to the Adaptive Technology Center. Right now they're located in Douglas Library because Stauffer is being renovated. But they're usually located in Stauffer on the ground floor. But right now they're in Douglas. They're on the website, the Queen's website. They're very knowledgeable folks who can help you out with providing course materials in alternative formats, as well as being able to provide guidance on whether a tech platform is compatible with, like, a screen reader, for example. A related resource, which also does that I'll point you to, again, in the resource list, is the EdTech Toolkit, which is offered through the CTL. So it's just a sort of database of EdTech tools that have been reviewed by support educators and educational support staff from different faculties, disciplines, different skill sets. It's organized to offer, like, pedagogical advice, like what learning activities that they're best suited for, tips for implementing the service level support, licensing, privacy, security, accessibility, information, all of that fun stuff. So again, that's the EdTech Toolkit. It's offered through the CTL. It's on the Queen's website. It's great. I think that was my last slide. I'm just going to look at the time, 2:21.